Hello everybody, welcome to the channel. I need to cut some splines today, or at least attempt cutting some splines. Here's what I'm working with. We have this shaft, and each end is a 1-inch 6 spline, all right? And this end goes into this collar. Hey, there we go. This end goes into that U-joint yoke. But this splined end is shallower than this one, so they're technically two different splines, but we have the blank made. That's what we will be cutting the new splines in. And this is a steering gear that is a part of a Minneapolis Moline prototype tractor, one of one, complete oddball. If you're new to the channel, here is the playlist that will tell you everything there is to know about it. Now, creating these splines would be pretty simple with the right cutter. Here's what that looks like. And the edges of the teeth are beveled at 60 degrees and the points are radiused. So that means these cuts are not flat, all right? The bottoms of these cuts are radiused, similar to the tops of the splines. For the more cultured among us, here's a conversion diagram that includes this with an example given of... that's an arrow. There are only 4 math symbols that I know, so I will never be smart enough to know what any of that means. But I'm able to measure things, and thankfully, they included a chart. So, 3 dimensions that we need. Major diameter, which is distance measured across 2 splines. Minor diameter, which is distance measured across 2 cuts. And then key width, which is the width of the raised spline itself. And I mentioned earlier that this end is a shallower spline than this one, but both ends are the same 1-inch major diameter. So using the chart, my minor diameter on the shallow end is the 0.9, and I have the 250 key width. So for the shallow end, I would need the F6 100A cutter. And the deeper spline on the other end is the 0.847 minor diameter with the 246 key. So I would need the F6 100B cutter for that end. So buy the 2 cutters, easy enough. The trouble is they're horribly expensive and they're made to go in a horizontal mill. I don't have a horizontal mill, so time to improvise. So with the right cutter, this would be very easy. You would just center up with the shaft, figure out your depth, and then make your cut. Index your shaft 60 degrees, make the second cut. Another 60, make the third. Work on around 4th, 5th, 6th, and you end up right back where you started. All your splines will have the appropriate angles on the edges and the nice radiused bottom, and everything will slide in and be very happy. But without the right cutter, well, you get this. I have key seat cutters, all right, and they are 90 degrees on the corners. And if you centered up with the shaft, this is the cut profile you would get. You wouldn't have the angled spline sides, and you'd have a flat bottomed cut. So how do we use this in place of this? Well, start looking at it. So all these little red dotted lines, well, here, skew it a little bit. Go like that. All of a sudden, these edges aren't angled anymore. All of a sudden, they're straight. And you see how this edge would line in with this one across from it. Same for these two and the other sets as well. So now we're into a zone where we could use a 90-degree sided cutter to start taking bites. This is where angles and positioning will make or break the job, but it should be possible to use the key seat cutter and come in from this way, make the first cut, illustrated in red, then come in from the other way, make the second cut, illustrated in blue. That'll give you the angles on the edges of your splines that you need, but it'll leave the center with this raised point down in the bottom. Now, this is where we could just end it all and center up with the shaft like normal and just flatten that bottom, and this would work just fine. That's all you have to do. 3 cuts, make a spline, 18, do the whole into the shaft. All right, 18 cuts, you've got 6 splines completely formed. But I'm a bit off, and I think I can use this same cutter with an almost infinity number of passes to try to replicate that radius bottom. When I think I can do something, I get awfully stubborn, and then that's the channel. You've seen it all. So if you're anything like me, own none of the right tools, only a few of the wrong ones, and have no real business trying to do any of this stuff, welcome aboard. You're going to like it here. All right, I've decided to start with the shallow splines first. So the shaft blank will be cinched into the indexing unit. And I've checked this before. It holds very well parallel to the bed of the Bridgeport. So it's just along this edge that we really need to check, because if we don't have this clamped down right, it could be crooked. And if it's crooked, we'll end up with tapered splines, and that's no good. So we'll run this in, zero it out, and then run it down the length. And we are looking good. No movement at all, so everything is clamped down straight. Now, a couple of things. I'm using this tailstock to support the shaft because we're out so far. Reason being, this is the oversized part of the new shaft that will fit the trued out housing bar. We covered all that last time, yada yada. So my collet only grabs onto it back here. And to set the cutter, I'm sure there's a better way, but this is how I am going to do it. So I've just touched off the bottom of the cutter to the top of the shaft. And to do that, I put the head in neutral so that I can spin it by hand. And you can just hear it. Just starting to touch that shaft. So I've zeroed the dial on the knee. That's going to be our starting point. And to help you visualize this next adjustment, we're set up just like this. The first cut will be made with this bottom corner of the cutter. So what you do is take your shaft diameter, divide that by 2. If I raised the shaft by that amount, that would put that bottom corner of the cutter on center line of the shaft. But that is also the center of this spline. But I know my spline width has to be 0.250. Half of that is 0.125. So subtract 0.125 from half of the shaft diameter. That will put the bottom corner of that cutter right on the top edge of that spline. So we'll move off of it, and then I'll do that adjustment with the knee, bring it right in where we'll make our first cut. So that brought us to where we are right here. Then I used the same touch-off method to set the depth of the first cut. It'll be about 60 thousandths total that I'll have to take, but I'm starting out a bit conservative. I'm only doing 30. That'll let me see how it's going to cut and then also set my overall cut length. Once we do that first pass and then have a look, if I'm happy with it, we'll go full depth after that. Have to go easy starting through that circlip cut right now. We're just about at full travel, full length of spline, and that looks good right there. So before I pull anything back, I'm going to get my travel stops all set on the bed here so that we can repeat the same stopping point with the next one. All right, so to save you all some time, I was happy with that first pass, so I went to full depth, put a little anchor lube on the cut, and we are just about to finish the second pass at full depth. And the rest will be at full depth if I end up really happy with this, and so far I am. Again, we're scraping slow through that circlip groove. Doesn't act like it wants to hang, but just in case. Almost at full travel. Right there, we hit our stop. Get some trash out of there first. Okay. So there's our first spline edge. The depth is good. The cut looks good. I'm happy with it throughout. So we leave everything down here alone. All we do now is re-index. So loosen that and pull our pin. Now this degree wheel is in tens, so that 1 is actually 10 degrees. We got 10, 20, 30, 40, so on. So we will rotate 60 degrees. Bring the 6 into register right there. And as long as our pin drops back in over here at the 0, because these are single degree intervals, 1 degree, 2, 3, 4, on to 9. So that's how you can get degree by degree. There we are, pin drops in, cinch that down. The spline that we cut is now rotated downward, and we start with the next one. I'm literally bottle feeding this the anchor lube, but if the cutter has a steady enough supply, it's whisper quiet. So we're just trying to make it last as long as possible at this point. And there's our stop. Cut number 2, looking good. Now we give it another 60 degrees. Another 60. And now another 60 degrees. All right, now final rotation. There we are. All right, we've got 6 evenly spaced passes, and all this does is complete cut number 1 for all 6 splines. Now we have to reset for cut number 2. And back to the props to better visualize. So we've been cutting like this off the bottom corner of the cutter. What I'm going to do is raise the knee, which will raise the shaft. And I'll start by raising it the same thickness as the cutter. So what that'll do, it'll bring the top corner of the cutter even with the passes that we've just been making. Then I will raise it another 0.250 because 0.250 is the width of the spline that I'm trying to make. So all we're doing is going from using the bottom of the cutter to using the top of the cutter. All right, simple as that. All right, so talking out loud helps. There's our 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and now we need 0, 9, 5, right there. All right, now this is where things are going to start getting a bit repetitive, so we won't cover every single spline cut and every adjustment on this side, but we're started out back at our same 0 degree starting point on the indexer. This first cut that defines the first spline is also what's really going to tell me if I set my initial ones correctly. This is for all the marbles right here. If this doesn't turn out, we'll just have to start over. No pressure. We'll go in far enough that I can get a decent measurement and proceed from there. So, finished with the cut. Let's roll this up where the light is a little more friendly. And, okay, already it's promising. The way the 2 tails of each cut are so symmetrical, that tells me that we're pretty even anyhow. So, I should be able to get a mic on it over on this side, we'll see what our spline width ended up being. I know we're kind of all hands here in this shot, but it's tight working. Let's see where we are. Look at that, 250, just about right on. You probably can't see it too well on GoPro, but very, very happy with how that turned out. All right, so we're set to do the rest of them now. And now we play the familiar game of rotate it 60 degrees and cut another pass. And it's a while later, but I've worked my way all the way around the shaft again. So we have defined all 6 splines. Now we work down the pointed ridges that run between them. And back to the pictures, we have completed step 1, and we are positioned here at the end of step 2, and that is the point that we need to make go away. Now, in all practicality, the best way to finish this off is to reposition the cutter for a 3rd pass. You would center it up with the shaft and just hog that point right on down to a flat bottom. The splines are still going to work as intended. Your only difference is you're cutting it a lot deeper between them than if you had the radius still intact. But for all intents and purposes, this is the best way forward to complete this job. And in most scenarios, it's the economical way to do it as well. Unfortunately, though, this is my home address, so I can't do that. But what I can do is leave the cutter right where it's at and just move the shaft. So this is what we're about to do. So here's where our cutter is right now. With small enough increments, I can rotate the shaft and then make another pass with the cutter. Rotate again, make another pass, so on and so forth until we get to where our angry red cutter is right here, and that's where we'll have to stop and do something else. But okay, so using this method, only this corner of the cutter is going to come into contact with the radius that we are trying to generate. All the rest of it will lift up and away. So it'll leave a bit of a saw-toothed bottom down there. But with fine enough changes in shaft position, those little saw teeth will get so small that they'll be inconsequential. Similar to how scary, smart Unabomber types know how to stack different sized rectangles under curves to approximate the area. If they can change the sizes of the rectangles in small enough increments, they can get close enough to target where it's good enough to proceed. Gets the job done. Now, here's a picture of a spline that I've already practiced this on, and zooming way in, we can see every pass that I made. The first half, I made at 1 degree intervals. That's as tight of rotation as I can manage. The second half, I bumped it up to 2 degree intervals. And zooming back out, the difference between them is really negligible. So I'll be using 2 degrees as we move forward. Now finally, between the width of my cutter and the distance between my splines, I can do up to 13 degrees clear rotation of the shaft before the face of the cutter will start chewing into the corner of the spline next door. So I will work all 6 splines over at least that far. At what point I will have to reposition the cutter back to setting number 1 and then work back the other way to finish out. And I know somebody's going to ask, what would happen if you would set the cutter on center with the shaft and just center the face of it up with your radius line? That would do a very good job of cleaning out the center, but then you would be lifted up and away when it come time to get down into each corner. Okay, so your corners would still be a little bit flat. So the best way to get it all the way around is to just do it like I'm doing here. Attack it from one direction and then bring it back from the other. So it will just be a lot of fine adjustments at the indexer, 2 degrees at a time, followed by a skim cut. Very light pass, then another adjustment and another light pass, another adjustment, another light pass, until we've worked all the way around. Well, I just shut the machine off, cleaned it up, and really it's looking all right. We don't know how things are going to fit yet, but yeah. Let's get the tailstock out of the way, but I'm leaving everything else about the Bridgeport at the current setting, because we don't know for sure if all is going to be well. So While I'm cranking this back, let's just refresh our memory. That's what it looked like with the first two defining cuts, which set the widths of each spline. And then we started working the center in from the one way, and then we worked it in from the other way. And that leaves us with what we see here. So I have a collar for test fitting right here. This is the same collar that's on the worm shaft. So just try. Okay, it's a little bit tight, but it slides on. We don't get much of a click, so that is a relief. That is definitely a relief. So I do have a lot of deburring to do with a small file. So once we do all of that, it's probably going to improve the fit even more, because this needs to, for this end, it needs to be an easy float. Okay, we don't want to have any binding for the rest of that steering sector to work as it should. But oh, that is a relief. Pretty happy with how that turned out. What do you say, Earl? Should we get back to work today? Yep. He says, hi, everybody. Yeah, about to get the day underway. Where'd he go? There he is. Okay, everybody, it's actually the day after tomorrow already. I know, time flies, doesn't it? But all joking aside, I decided to take yesterday and just leave the camera off and see how long it took me to cut the rest of the splines. So here we are, 6 splines in each end. They turned out very well. We still have some fitting, finishing, and deburring left to do, but the hard part is behind us. So here we are, old shaft, new shaft. The first 6 splines actually took me about a day and a half to cut, but that was between figuring out the setup, drawing pictures, explaining the process, all of the recording steps. You do more of that than the actual work. So yesterday, no distractions, start to finish. About 6 hours is what it still took me to cut these other 6 splines. And they are longer and a little bit deeper, so we did have to take some more material, but it was still about an hour per spline, the way I did it. However, I am very happy with how that profile turned out. And I made a roadmap of the work, but as I said earlier, with the right machine and the right cutter, we could have done this whole job in 12 cuts, start to finish. But the way I had to do it, well, a little bit more involved. So the end with the shallower splines, it required the 12 main cuts to define the splines, and then another 14 cuts to clean out the lower area between each one. The end with the deeper splines, same 12 defining cuts, but I only had to do 12 clean out cuts between each one, because as these splines get deeper, the space between them becomes narrower. So that's the reason for that difference. So 96 cuts on the shallow end, 84 cuts on the deep end. I'm still 180 cuts total to do what we have right here. And we aren't finished yet. There's still a little bit of filing and deburring that has to be done. But that's why I always say when it comes to machining, I just fake it until I make it. That's not trying to be funny or sarcastic. Really, if you don't have the right stuff, figure out a way to get it done. And I think I did. So to finish this out real quick, I need to knock the sharp corners off of both ends. And that's something I usually do as soon as I'm done turning the shaft to size. But for this job, I decided to leave them in place because they're like an erasable margin where you can do little test cuts. And if something's not right, it's all going to go away anyhow. And that really came in handy yesterday when I was finishing out this other end. I was so happy with the first one. I was worried that if I made a mistake down here, I'd have to start all over. So what you're seeing right now are the first little test cuts that I did yesterday morning. And having the sharp corner intact here let me cut in just enough to check my setup, verify it was on. I could even measure my spline width. I knew before I did anything permanent that I had everything set where it needed to be. So now we can just take those down and flush it out just like the original. And finally, our last step, gently filing the sharp corners off of the splines. Let's bring it on home, everybody. So out with the old and in with the new. I do like looking at that. It turned out very well. We'll do the test fit to cap it all off. We have the proper, easy slip fit that we need out here on the worm gear end, and then the U-joint yoke. A little bit more snug, but that's how I wanted it. Kind of the Achilles heel of these shafts is the fact that this yoke has to be just a slip fit and not be solidly pinned or anything, not only to be able to assemble the steering shaft, but to let this work and wobble and act sort of like a slip joint in a drive shaft. So they're just prone to wear because movement equals wear, and then this is out in the dirt, and that doesn't help matters any, but wow, I knew this was going to be a huge, huge job. That's why I've been dreading it for as long as I have, but couldn't be happier with how it turned out. Well, everybody, I hope you all enjoyed watching this episode. I'm thoroughly pleased with the end result, but I have to admit I'm a little bit nervous, all right, because, all right, I've thrown a lot into this. This is day number 5 of making what you just watched, and a lot of thought went into it, a lot of time spent turning on dials, a lot of hitting your marks and don't mess up, and make sure, double check, triple check that it's landing right. Don't make any mistakes, and I'm extremely pleased with it. So I've put a lot into it, and I'm really happy with it. And that's why it makes me nervous, because almost every time I've been in this place, I'm excited to get the episode out, and then the reception is lukewarm at best. And it seems like the least amount of effort and the least amount of time I put into things, those are the ones that pop. I've been doing this since 2011. I still don't have you all figured out, but I'm happy with it, and I hope you're happy with the episode as well. So as always, I thank you for watching. I hope to see you back again on the next one.